Today we're going to start working on our drawing skills, and in order to do this we're going to just use this packet to help us build up our drawing strategies and techniques. So we call this our Drawing Basics packet. You'll notice on the front of this packet that it has a drawing proficiency scale. Mine is an actual packet, but you guys will be getting these sheets individually, and then we'll be turning them in as we complete each paper. So when we look at this, for our proficiency scale, our goal is that we want to help students create an original drawing using learned techniques. Well, that's kind of vague, so if we go down here into number 2, remember you have to master all of level 2 in order to get to a level 3. So for vocabulary, some of these vocab terms you know about, like scumble, maybe even stipple. Some of them we've talked about with our elements and principles of design, like value, but now we're going to talk about a value scale. And then we have just some artists that are listed over here as well as just different types of working with techniques or strategies to draw or to draw more accurately. And then we have skills over here. So for our skills, we're hoping that we can teach you guys how to draw an object that looks real or 3D, that you guys know how to use a ruler to draw horizontal and vertical lines. This will be especially with our perspective unit. That you guys can draw from a model, still life, or photo reference, and that you know how to use craftsmanship again to make a gallery-ready piece of work. So let's move on to page 1. So in order to complete page 1, you are going to need a drawing pencil packet that is just a packet baggie that has a bunch of drawing pencils within it. I know many of you are just familiar with using a school pencil, but now we're going to start getting a little higher in our art education. And inside each bag, you'll find that there's a little cheat sheet for what should be in each bag. So we should have one pink eraser. Then you should have one of each pencil below. So you should have a 6B, 4B, a 2B or a B pencil. They might be labeled differently. An HB or a school pencil, a 2H and a 4H. So let's check that out and see if I have everything that I need. So I've got my pink eraser. You can do this right along with me. Okay, the way that you tell what the pencil is right on the back edge of the pencil. There's a little number there. Okay, sometimes it's up here if a student accidentally sharpened the wrong end of the pencil. Hey, reminder for you, this is a good tip. Do not sharpen if you get a brand new unsharpened drawing pencil. Do not sharpen it on the end where the label is at, because eventually you won't have a label anymore, right? So I'm just going to start laying mine out. Here's my 4H. Okay, then I have my 2H. You can go either direction or just make sure that you have them all. Okay. My HB, for me, it's a school pencil. For some of you, it says HB on it. For mine, I have a 2B. Again, some of you say B. And then I've got my 4B and my 6B. So awesome. I have all of my drawing pencils. And what's really cool about this, you can see this already on this value scale. This is what a value scale is. My 6B is actually a very soft graphite compressed together. So it's going to turn out really, really dark. My 4H is actually compressed like really, really tightly, so it's going to have a lighter touch and value to it. So let's begin with our worksheet now. I'm going to move my pencils off to the side. Right here, we're just going to learn a little bit of vocabulary first. So looking at the vocabulary, you guys already know what value is. It's the lightness or darkness of a color. We have talked about what tints, tones, and shades are. So tints, again, are just colors with white added to them. Tones are colors mixed with gray. And shades are colors with black added to them. So now let's look at number 1. It says, use all the drawing pencils to complete a value scale. Label each value on the line above the box. One box will be white. Label this box W. Okay. If you are right-handed, you're going to follow along with me. If you are left-handed, I want you to do the opposite of what I'm doing, because otherwise you're going to smear your value scale all the way through if you are left-handed. So for me, I'm right-handed, so I'm going to start with my 6B. This is how we start our value scale. Okay, it starts with a 6B. Then I'm going to move to my 4B, and if you're not sure where I'm getting this information, it's right here on your cheat sheet. Okay, my next pencil of value is going to be a 2B. You can also write B there, that's fine. I would accept that answer on a quiz or a test. Okay. And then we have an HB. Then we've got a 2H and a 4H. And then I'm just going to use my 4H to write W because it says to label this box W. Okay, so I've taught you guys a lot about how to work with colored pencils. It's similar with drawing pencils. So when we start working on blending. This whole concept of this value scale is to get a smooth blend from box to box. It's not necessarily going to look choppy like this example on your sheet. So in order to do that and make it look like it blends from a 6B to 4B, this is my strategy that I'd like to teach you. When you hold a drawing pencil, I would recommend getting out way on the end of the pencil. That might feel uncomfortable the first time that you do it. But if you can get way out there, I've also seen some students hold it like so, where they grip over the top. Either is fine, but if you can start working on getting out to the edge of your pencil and thinking about, you want your pencil to basically rub on like the side of the pencil, okay? That'll make a nice smooth blend. So now that I have just that in mind, I'm gonna start on the back end of my 6B box. I'm gonna work in ovals, and for right now, I just want you to be watching what I'm doing. When I say go, then I want you to pick up your pencils and you can start this step. So for right now, I just have medium pressure. I'm building up my values. And as I work now towards my 4B, I'm about 3/4 of the way through the box, I'm gonna start lightening up my pressure just so I can see how light I can maybe get my 6B to go. But now here's the trick. In order to get a smooth transition from this box to this box, I'm actually going to very lightly take my 6B and go about halfway into the 4B. It's okay if it's a little bit messy, okay? But that's the trick there. And then, okay, now when I take my next value, which is a 4B, the idea is trying to match values here, but you might discover that your 4B just is a little bit darker, okay? So I'm just starting with medium pressure. Again, and I'm working my way forward. Okay, please keep watching, don't start just yet. And now I'm starting to ease up on my pressure and make it lighter. Hey, here's what's happening right here. It's going from darker to lighter to darker to lighter. We don't want that to happen. It's called a jump or a gap. In order to fix this, now what I do to blend back into my 6B, I'm gonna take my 4B and I'm gonna keep kind of that medium pressure and I'm gonna push back into the 6B. Okay, so I'll show that again. In order to get my 4B to blend with my 6B, I have to go back into the 6B with my 4B pencil and blend backwards, okay? This is where, you know, a lot of students, if they're impatient, this is why they struggle with blending. Now I'm gonna go back to my 6B and I'm gonna try just again by pressing a little bit darker and getting it to blend forward to my 4B. Okay, notice now it's a smooth transition. It goes from dark to light. That's the same concept for the rest of the value scale. So I'm gonna let you guys get started. I'm gonna start walking through and still showing you up here. So if you feel a little bit lost on like how to do this process or just remembering that kind of crossover between the two values, okay, you can watch me do it again here with my 4B, but you can also get started if you're ready to do that. So for me, starting with my 2B now, I'm going to just medium pressure, okay. And actually, I should start with my 4B because I'm going to take my 4B and I'm going to take it halfway into my 2B box. Okay, I'm going to take my 2B now, try and match values. Okay, whoop, it's a little bit darker, so I'll have to go back and do some blending. It's okay if yours is a little bit darker or a little bit lighter than mine. You might be pressing a little bit harder, you might be pressing a little bit lighter. Again, the whole goal of this project, or this, I guess I shouldn't call it a project, this value scale is to get a smooth transition all the way through by using multiple pencils, not just one. Now I'm on to HB, trying to match my value. Got a little bit darker, so now I'm going to take this all the way to the 2H. So I am looking for you to fill in the majority of your box as well. So don't leave a huge gap. Don't just make me a skinny little tube in here. Fill in the box to the best of your ability. I'll show you a trick here at the end, how to erase just the outer pieces. So even if you go above or below, we can kind of clean up those lines here in a little bit. By the time you get to your 2H, you should be using fairly light pressure. If you feel like you're really struggling with the pencils and getting that pencil grip, think about like just wiggling your fingers. Okay, that's kind of the action of the movement. Okay. For my last box for 4H, I'm just going to take it very lightly, about halfway into my white box. So barely touching the paper, just kind of filling in halfway. And blend backwards if you need to blend backwards. Okay, I'm going to check my value scale now that I'm finished and make sure I don't have any gaps. So I should see no areas that go from dark to light to dark to light. Okay, and mine looks pretty smooth going through. Okay, I also don't want to see you at this point because some students like to do this. They like to take their finger and blend it out. I don't want to see that for this strategy. We're going to get to that later on this page. But I just want to see your ability to manipulate the pencil. Okay. Like I shared, I'm going to take my eraser and just kind of gently erase all those extra little lines that I have going above my boxes to make it a little neater. Okay. So that completes our value scale. Now we're going to move on to number 2. Number 2 says, in the boxes below, illustrate each value making technique to create a mini value scale within the box. So each one of these is a technique that we can use in order to develop value. Okay? So the first one is just called hatching. I'm going to use my regular old school pencil for this. If you would like, you can use a different pencil if you feel like you really liked how the 2B felt or how the 2H felt, that's fine. But I'm going to use my school pencil. And hatching, we're just basically copying what's happening over here on this left box into the right box. So hatching means that they are lines that go in the same direction. Okay? If you want to create even more value, what you can do is you can make some of the lines a little bit thicker or press harder. Okay? And then you can also start spacing them out a little bit farther as you work away. So if they're really close together and they're dark, that's going to seem like a darker value. If you start spreading them out and they're lighter, that's going to feel like a lighter area of value. Okay? So that's hatching. Cross-hatching, if you can imagine, is just taking hatching and crisscrossing over the top of each other. So it can be the same concept in we can make some of our lines, you know, thicker. And then start spreading them out and making them lighter. And then I'm going to do my cross-hatching, so I'm going to make this line thicker. So long as they're just a different direction than the original line, it's considered cross-hatching. So this area looks definitely much darker on the left-hand side than on the right-hand side. So that can create even more value if you want to try that strategy. Okay. Let's talk about blending. Okay, this is now where you can use your finger if you would like. A couple ideas here. So if you want to start with just a HB pencil, you can. Okay, so again, I've seen students use their hand grip just like this. I've also seen students for blending, it's a lot easier for them to use this technique where they're just kind of like shading, so it kind of looks more like this. If that's a style that's a little more effective for you, go ahead and try that. So the idea here is I'm trying to copy. It's nice and dark down here and it's nice and light up in the top kind of corner there. So I'm going to build that value up. And the idea here is all about pencil pressure. So I'm going to press really hard where I want it dark. And then I'm going to start pressing really lightly or lighter as I work towards that lighter area. Okay. Now, a couple ideas here. You can take your finger now and you could start in the light area and work your way to the dark area, and then you're going to end up with a little graphite finger, right? Or you could take a little piece of tissue. This is another way that students have done it in the past. And you could just start it again in the light area and then push and gently blend to the dark area. The nice thing about the tissue is that you don't get a dirty finger, but the hard part is that it pulls up so much graphite. So in some cases when students are drawing and they're trying to get a really dark color, they can't achieve it with this because it just pulls up too much of the graphite. So it's a good tool, but sometimes it has its limitations. So that's blending, okay? Where we're smoothing out, we're using a tool or a finger to blend the graphite together, okay? Stippling, you guys are familiar with this from our previous page. So stippling is basically just making a bunch of dots. So if you want it to feel darker in one area, you should have your dots closer together, okay? And then I'm gonna let mine get a little bit farther apart to make them feel lighter up in this top right corner. So that would be stippling. Okay. Scumbling is now just making C's. So this is always the one that's kind of challenging for students. When I look at this example, I'm going to follow what they have here. So I'm going to put my C's a little bit closer together down here in the bottom right corner. And then as I work towards the top left, I'm going to space them out a little bit more. So it's like making a really fast, quick flick of a C. I have to do it multiple times to make it really dark in certain areas. Okay. And now let's talk about rendering, because some of you maybe were looking at blending and rendering and you're like, they look the same, Mrs. Hauser. So if that's the case, I'm going to teach you that blending is where you're actually kind of using a tool to make it blend. But with rendering, we're actually going to use almost like a subtractive idea in the sense that we're going to take our HB pencil and we're going to fill the whole square in with kind of a flat value that's somewhat dark. And then we're going to use a tool, our eraser, to actually erase out the lighter areas. So instead of trying to manipulate the pencil with blending, where we're trying to get our pencil pressure to actually be different types of pressure, okay, you're just going to take and put a flat value in, okay, all one value, and then you take your pink eraser, and where it's lighter, you're going to use your eraser like a pencil. So if you want it to be lighter, you press harder. If you want it to start fading out, you just use your eraser a little bit lighter to make it blend. Okay, so that's the difference between blending and rendering. Rendering, you use the eraser as a tool. Okay, and that completes our page 1. I'd like to give you guys just a little bit of time if you need to go back and finish maybe your value scale, if you need a little bit more time for that. And then just a little bit more time if you need to complete these boxes down below. So I will leave this just open just like this. So if you need to pause the video here, you can pause the video, maybe take 2 minutes to finish that up, and then we can move on to page 2. Okay, so moving on to page 2 of our drawing packet, we're going to talk about some more value vocabulary. This is generally going to be new information for you guys. So this is how we would identify different parts of a form. So when we look at this, we have these vocabulary terms that start with a light source. This is where the light is coming from. Okay, so it might be the sun, it might be a light bulb in the picture. Then we have a highlight. This is going to be the lightest part of the form. It's where the light is directly hitting the form. So if we quickly look down at some of these examples here, okay, we can see on some of these forms where the light is directly hitting it. Okay. Then we have what are called midtones. Midtones are the values that occur between the highlight and the core shadow. Okay. The core shadow is the darkest part of the form. It's the area of darkest shadow. Okay. Again, we can kind of see some of those maybe happening down here on the cube or the cylinder. Okay. And then we have what's called reflected light. That's light that bounces off another surface back onto the form. Okay. And then we have a cast shadow. That's the shadow that's created by the form when light hits the form. So now, let's go down here to number 3. It says, identify the different parts of value on the shaded forms. Write the answers on the provided blanks next to the forms. Okay, so we're basically going to go through, and on each one of these, we're going to identify what the A, B, C, D, E is and write it on our blanks here. So I'm going to take my HB pencil, and if I look at A, okay, to me, that looks like where it's the lightest part of the form. So if I go back up here to my words, okay, that might be the highlight, right? Because that's the lightest part of the form. So A is the highlight. Another way that you could complete this section is that you could go through and you could start with the words first, because each one of these words is going to fill in the blank. So if we look at midtones, that's the values that occur between the highlight and the core shadow. Well, we know the highlight is the lightest part, the core shadow is the darkest part. Okay? On some of these, that might be kind of tricky to figure out. So maybe let's skip that one. Let's go to core shadow. The core shadow is the darkest part of the form, or the areast of darkest shadow. Okay, so when I look at these forms, probably the easiest one to see is either here on the cone or on the cylinder. Okay, the letter here is going to be letter C, creates our core shadow. Okay. Well, now that we know that C is the core shadow and A is the highlight, okay, if we look at letter B, that's probably going to represent our midtone. Okay. You can see another example of this right here on the sphere, okay, between A and C, letter B, that's our midtone, okay? So now we have reflected light. Reflected light is the light that bounces off another surface back onto the form. Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's look at the sphere. Okay, what they're talking about is the light is coming from right here, right? I promise I went to art school, that's my beautiful sun, okay? And it's directly hitting here, but it's also hitting here on the ground, and then it's bouncing back up onto the form. So the section that we're looking at here is D, okay, and that's going to represent your reflected light. So we can fill that one in. Another example of this, we can see it on the cube here. So if we can imagine there's like a wall here, the light is hitting the wall and then it's going back onto the cube. Okay, that creates reflected light. Okay, our last one, the cast shadow, that's the shadow that is created by the form when the light hits the form. So we can obviously tell here with some of our examples, okay, the sun again is hitting here the form and creating the cast shadow for letter E. Okay. I see sometimes that students mix up core and cast shadow. If you think about it when you're having a conversation with someone, you always say like, hey, look at my cast shadow, or look, I've cast a shadow. Okay, so that can help you maybe remember those two. Okay, let's scoot down here to number 4. Okay, number 4 says, let's practice. Use a light source. Use any of the value making techniques to shade the shapes below into 3D forms. So let's start by placing our sun or placing our light source. So for me, I'm going to place our sun just right over here on each one of these examples. Okay, you can draw a little light bulb too if you want to do more of a light bulb. Okay, you just kind of decide how you want it to be, a light. So we're going to use our value making techniques. That's from page 1. And we have a lot of options that we could choose from. So let's just start with something maybe kind of simple for our first one. I'm going to start with some just hatching. Just to show how you can create that with a cylinder. So I'm going to use this example just right above here to help you guys. So if I were doing hatching, okay, I would maybe start with my HB pencil, and I'm going to just look at my core shadow area. For now, I want you guys just to watch. I don't want you guys to actually do this step. Okay? And if I were doing just straight hatching, I'd be pressing pretty hard, and then I would slowly lighten up, going either direction because it gets lighter as I go out. So it's basically like a mini value scale. Okay. Then I have a little bit of a middle tone over here as well. So I might add a couple lines in there. And then I would generally have a few lines on the top to represent a middle tone. Okay. I could do something like that. But I also want to be teaching you guys how to make things look realistic. So in order to do that, now I want you to follow along with me. This is how I want you to complete the first one. I'm going to start teaching you guys how to really practice blending. So I'm going to start again with that HB. It's my preference for getting a middle tone value. Maybe 2B or 2H is another choice that you could use. And I'm just going to start here in that core shadow area, just doing a light value for right now. You'll notice I'm going straight up and down. Okay, this is important. If you want it to look actually like a cylinder, you need to keep all your lines going straight up and down. Okay, so that's kind of my little strip or section that I have that I'm working with, okay? The light's coming from over here, so I know my highlight is going to be somewhere in this section. So now it's just about building a mini value scale. I'm going to very lightly go towards the highlight, and then I'm also going to, if I look at this example up here, It actually doesn't necessarily get too light. It stays somewhat dark on this back side because this is where the reflected light area is. But I'm just going to kind of fill it in with a middle tone value. Okay, we talked about on this left side, there is a little bit of shading happening, okay, for the middle tone, but again, it all gets light right here in the highlight. If you accidentally maybe fill it in too much, take your eraser and do a little rendering and pull it back out for the highlight. Okay. But now we can make our core shadow a lot darker by taking our 6B, okay, and we're gonna press to just kind of make that area that's the core shadow a little bit darker. It's not about making a strip that is perfectly perfect, just like so on the right-hand side here. And you actually want to kind of stop it at different stopping points to actually make it feel round. So notice I'm not going necessarily all the way to the bottom, okay, or all the way to the top. And I'm starting to kind of blend it out a little bit with my value scale, okay? So I'm getting lighter as I work towards the highlight, getting lighter as I work towards my reflected light area. Okay? This takes practice. Okay? Take a little time with it. Okay? My last step is the top part of my cylinder. If I were to shift this light even just down and it was more directed straight at the front, okay, this top piece then would become more of a middle tone. So I switched to my HB, and now I'm just going to fill it in. Notice I changed the direction of my lines to be horizontal. The reason I've done this is because the lines that are the longest, that are on the outside, actually go horizontally. They don't go vertically anymore. So this is another strategy to help you make things look more 3D, is if you follow that contour line, is what it's called, or the outline, whatever the longest line is there, okay, that will create just a more 3D form when you're drawing, okay? So now let's look at this next one. This next one I would like to use rendering. So in order to do rendering, we're gonna try and copy this sphere up here. So we're gonna start with just a very flat value through the entire sphere. Okay. And before we start taking our eraser, I'm going to take my 6B again because I know it's a good core shadow color. And you'll notice there's just this little like kind of crescent moon shape. That's the darkest part of the form. And it's not a perfect crescent moon, okay, but just kind of this little strip in here that's kind of curvy is the darkest area. So I want you to press medium pressure and start blending it, okay, to create that middle core shadow section. Okay, and then after we've added our 6B in there, we're gonna take our eraser and we're gonna do some of that rendering. So we're pressing hard where it's the highlight, and then we're gonna start easing up on our pressure to get it to blend out. Okay, this should be a circular motion. Okay, take a little time. If you accidentally blend it out too much, take your HB again, just kind of lightly put some of those values back in. So with a sphere, everything should be really like circular, okay? It should be kind of a curvy pattern, okay? Our last one, we're gonna do this one really quick. We're gonna talk about scumbling. So we already have our core shadow side kind of mapped out for us. So I can take my 6B and I'm going to scumble in some really dark values that just overlap each other. It's okay if this is a little bit messy, okay, but it shouldn't be all over the paper. Then for my front panel, that's going to be where my middle tone is based on this picture up here. So I'm going to take my HB pencil again, that's what I prefer for my middle tones, and I'm going to scumble in the front panel. And then my last one, I'm actually going to use my 4H to help me with my highlight. I could technically leave it blank, but it'll look kind of awkward. So I'm going to take my 4H and just very lightly add in a couple scumble lines to the top. Okay, if my middle tone looks too similar to my highlight, I could always darken it up just a little bit to make it seem like I have all three values covered. Okay. we'll take a minute here in just a moment. I want to give you guys just 1 minute to make sure you have that before we draw out our cast shadows.